With the Achaean ships burning, Patroclus has lived as the loyal squire to the sulking Achilles. He convinced Achilles to let him wear his divine armor and lead their soldiers, the Myrmidons, to save the fleet. This is the first-hand account of the moment he disobeyed orders and pushed his attack too far. He has saved the ships. He has routed the Trojans. His orders were clear. Push them back from the beach, then return. Do not attack the city, but victory is a drug. The Trojans break before him. He feels like a god, and at the apex of his triumph, he forgets the warning of the man he loves. He charges the walls of Troy. A god is waiting for him there. This is not a history lesson. This is the eyewitness account. Act. The Forbidden Wall.
3 times the young warrior Patroclus threw himself against an angle of the high wall, his shield held high, his spear a blur of bronze. He was a storm of fury and purpose, a single man determined to unmake a city. Each time he charged, he was met not by mortal men, but by a force he could not see. 3 times the god Apollo, cloaked from sight, beat him back. The god's immortal hands struck his shield, a sound not of bronze on bronze, but of thunder cracking in a clear sky. The force of it was absolute, a physical rejection from the universe itself. But Patroclus, drunk on the slaughter and wearing the armor of a demigod, was beyond reason. He gathered himself for a 4th assault, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He was coming on like a god himself, a mortal man touching the edges of divinity. It was then that Apollo revealed himself, not in form, but in voice. A voice that was not heard in the ears, but felt in the bones. A sound that shook the very foundations of the world. "Draw back, noble Patroclus," it boomed. "It is not your fate to sack the city of the Trojan chieftains, nor will it be the fate of Achilles, who is a far, far better man than you are." The words were not just a warning. They were a judgment. The arrogance drained from him in an instant, replaced by the cold dread of a man who has looked into the sun and seen not light, but an eye staring back. On hearing this, Patroclus withdrew. He stumbled back some distance, careful to avoid the lingering anger of Apollo, an anger that felt like a physical heat upon his skin. He had touched the wall. He had been denied, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. The god's deception. Meanwhile, inside the city, Hector waited. He stood with his horses and his chariot just inside the Scaean gates, the great western entrance to Troy. He was caught in a moment of indecision, a rare thing for the commander of the Trojan armies. Should he drive out again and continue the fight, chasing the Achaeans who now swarmed leaderless? Or should he heed the caution in his heart and call the army back inside the safety of the gates? The tide had turned so suddenly, it felt like a trap. As he stood there, caught between valor and wisdom, a figure approached him. It was a young, vigorous warrior, familiar to him. It was the shape of Aetius, his own uncle, the brother of his mother Hecuba. But it was not Aetius. It was Phoebus Apollo, wearing a mortal's face as a mask. The god had come to ensure the day's bloody work was completed. "Hector," the god said, his voice a perfect imitation of the man he impersonated, full of bluff camaraderie. "Why have you left off fighting? This is ill done of you." He gestured to the field. "If I were as much a better man than you, as I am in fact a worse one, you would soon regret this hesitation." The words were a subtle poison, playing on Hector's pride and his duty. The god leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Forget the rest. Drive your chariot straight towards Patroclus." "Perhaps," the god continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips, "perhaps Apollo himself will grant you a triumph over him. Perhaps you may even kill him." With this final perfect lie, the god's work was done. Hector, his doubts erased and his heart set on a single purpose, did not question the sudden disappearance of his uncle. He turned to his charioteer. "Cebriones," he commanded, his voice hard as iron. "Drive us back into the fight." As they thundered onto the plain, Apollo moved ahead of them, unseen. The god passed in among the Achaean ranks, and where he walked, he struck panic into their hearts. He gave triumph not to the better soldiers, but to Hector and the Trojans. Hector, now a guided missile of divine will, let the other Danaans alone. He cut down no other man. His eyes were fixed on a single prize. He drove straight at Patroclus. The charioteers fall. Seeing the charge of Troy's greatest champion, Patroclus did not waver. He was Achilles' brother in arms. He did not know how to retreat. He sprang from his own chariot to the ground, planting his feet firmly in the blood-soaked earth. In his left hand, he held his long ash spear. In his right, he scooped up a jagged, heavy stone, one as large as his hand could comfortably hold. A primitive weapon for a final, brutal confrontation. He stood his ground as the chariot thundered towards him. He waited. Then he drew back his arm and threw the stone with all his might. It was not a long throw, nor was it aimed at Hector. It was aimed at the driver. The cast was not in vain. The stone struck Cebriones, Hector's charioteer, a bastard son of King Priam, just as he held the reins, guiding the horses. It hit him square on the forehead. The bone of his brow was smashed inwards. His eyes, suddenly loose, fell from their sockets and dropped to the ground at his own feet, still staring. He dropped from the chariot, not like a man falling, but like a diver, plunging headfirst into the dark water of death. There was no more life left in him, and over him, Patroclus, you let your pride speak. In that moment of grim victory, you could not contain the triumphant, terrible joy of the kill. You shouted a taunt over the body. "Bless my heart," you cried, your voice raw. "How active he is! How well he dives! If we had been at sea, this fellow could have dived from the ship's side and brought up as many oysters as the whole crew could stomach, even in rough water. He has dived so beautifully off his chariot onto the ground," you finished, the terrible joke hanging in the air. "It seems, then, that there are divers also among the Trojans." That bitter jest would cost you everything. The whirlwind of dust. As the words left his lips, Patroclus flung himself upon the body of Cebriones. He moved with the explosive spring of a lion that, while attacking a stockyard, is itself struck in the chest by a farmer's spear. His own courage, his own fury, was becoming his undoing. But Hector, seeing his half-brother and driver fall, had already sprung from his now uncontrolled chariot. He landed on the ground with the heavy thud of bronze and fury, his own spear in hand. The two men met over the body. They fought like two lions on a high mountain, snarling and tearing at each other over the carcass of a stag they have both claimed. There was no strategy here, no tactics, only a primal, desperate need to possess the dead and destroy the living. Hector would not let go. He had gotten his hands on the corpse's head and held fast. Patroclus, equally stubborn, kept a firm hold of his feet. And around them, a fierce and desperate fight raged, as the other Danans and Trojans rushed in to support their champions. It was like the wind, like the east and south winds fighting for dominance, tearing at each other in some dense mountain forest. You hear the beech and ash and cornel trees groaning under the strain. The tops of the trees roar as they beat on one another, and you can hear the boughs themselves cracking and breaking. Even so did the Trojans and Achaeans spring upon one another and lay about each other in that swirling melee. Neither side would give way. It was a stalemate of pure hatred. Many a pointed spear, thrown and missed, fell uselessly to the ground. Many a winged arrow, sped from its bowstring, lost its purpose in the chaos around the body of Cebriones. Many a great stone beat on many a shield as they fought. But there he lay, at the center of it all. In the whirling clouds of dust, the man they fought for, Cebriones, lay all huge and hugely, heedless of his driving now. So long as the sun was still high in the middle of the sky, the weapons of either side were equally deadly, and men fell like wheat before a scythe. But as the sun began its descent, when men think of unyoking their oxen from the plough, the Achaeans, by some unseen favor, proved to be stronger. With a great heave, they drew Cebriones out of the range of the darts and the tumult of the Trojans. They dragged his body back behind their lines and began to strip the armor from his shoulders. Patroclus had won the body. It was his last victory. The gods' betrayal. Thinking the fight was won, that the Trojans were broken, Patroclus was filled with a final, fatal surge of power. He sprang forward like the war god Mars himself, with a terrific shout, and charged the Trojan lines one last time. 3 times he charged into them, a whirlwind of death. 3 times he killed 9 men with each charge. He was more than a man in that moment. He was a force of nature, a reaping flame. But as you were coming on like a god for that final glorious time, then, O Patroclus, the hour of your end was approaching. For Phoebus Apollo, his deception of Hector complete, now came to fight you himself, in fell earnest. Patroclus did not see him. He did not see the god as he moved through the crush of the battle. for Apollo was wrapped in a thick, dark mist. The god came up behind him, silent as death, and the god struck him, not with a weapon, not with a fist. He struck him from behind, on his back and his broad shoulders, with the flat of his immortal hand. The blow was not meant to wound, but to undo. It was the touch of a god unmaking a man. Patroclus's eyes turned dizzy. The world swam before him. At that same moment, Phoebus Apollo reached out and knocked the helmet from his head. It rolled, rattling, under the horse's feet. Its proud horsehair plumes, which had gleamed in the sun, were all at once begrimed with dust and blood. Never before had that helmet suffered such an indignity. It had served to protect the head and the comely forehead of the godlike hero Achilles. It was a holy object, a gift to a king. Now, however, the god Zeus himself, watching from on high, delivered it over to be worn by Hector. A spoil of war, not yet won. But the end of Hector, too, was near. The blow from the god had shattered Patroclus's strength. The bronze-shod spear in his hand, so great and so strong, a gift from the centaurs, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. It broke in his grip. His shield, the great shield of Achilles that covered him from head to foot, fell from his limp grasp and clattered to the ground. The leather band that held it snapped, and then Apollo, with a final, invisible touch, undone the fastenings of his breastplate. His mind became clouded. His limbs failed him. He stood there in the middle of the raging battle, dazed, unarmed, and utterly, totally vulnerable. The final spear. He stood as one dazed, the roar of battle fading to a dull hum in his ears. And into that moment of perfect vulnerability stepped a young Dardanian warrior named Euphorbus, son of Pantaus. He was the best spearman of his time, a fine horseman, and a fleet runner, a man of great talent and greater ambition. He had already, in his short time as a warrior, dismounted 20 men from their chariots. He saw his chance for glory. He it was, O knight Patroclus, that first drove a weapon into your mortal flesh. He came up behind you and struck you in the back with his spear, midway between the shoulders. But he did not overpower you. It was a coward's blow from behind, and Euphorbus had no stomach for a real fight. As soon as the spear found its home, he pulled the ashen shaft out of the wound and ran back into the crowd. He would not stand firm and wait for Patroclus, unarmed though he now was, to attack him. But the damage was done. Patroclus, unnerved by the god's blow, and now by the spear wound, stumbled back. He tried to get under the cover of his own men, in fear for his life. Hector saw it all. He saw the god's intervention, though he did not understand it. He saw Patroclus stagger. He saw him give ground. And now, Hector forced his way through the ranks for the final kill. When he was close up with him, he did not hesitate. He thrust his own spear forward into the lower part of Patroclus's belly, driving the bronze point right through him. Patroclus fell heavily to the ground. A great cry of grief went up from the Achaeans who saw him fall. It was done. As a lion, fighting a fierce wild boar over a small mountain spring, finally overcomes him and the boar can hardly breathe, so did Hector take the life of the brave son of Menoetius. "Patroclus," he said, sneering down at the dying man, "you thought you would sack our city, didn't you? Rob our Trojan women of their freedom and carry them off in your ships, fool. Hector and his fleet horses were always here to defend them. I am the foremost of all Trojan warriors, and I stave off the day of bondage. As for you, vultures shall devour you here. Poor wretch. Achilles, with all his bravery, was no help to you at all. And yet I imagine when you left him, he charged you, didn't he? Come not back to the ships, knight Patroclus, till you have rent the blood-stained shirt of murderous Hector from his body. That's what he told you, wasn't it? And your fool's heart answered him yes inside you. Then, as the life ebbed out of you, you answered, O knight Patroclus. Hector, vaunt as you will, for Zeus and Apollo have given you this victory. It is they who vanquished me so easily, they who stripped the armor from my shoulders. Had 20 men like you attacked me, all of them would have fallen before my spear. Fate and the son of Leto have overpowered me. Among mortal men, it was Euphorbus. You are only the third in the killing of me. I say further, and lay my saying to your heart, you too shall live but for a little season. Death and the day of your doom are close upon you, and they will lay you low by the hand of Achilles. When he had thus spoken, his eyes were closed in death. His soul left his body and flitted down to the house of Hades, mourning its sad fate, and bidding farewell to the youth and vigor of its manhood. Act 3.
Dead though he was, Hector still spoke to him. Patroclus, why foretell my doom? Who knows? Perhaps Achilles himself will be struck down by my spear before me. He plants his foot on the body, thrusts it off, and lets it lie on its back. The fight is not over. The fight is now for the body, for the armor. The war will grind on, demanding more. The death of one man is the reason for the next. The cycle of vengeance is absolute. Patroclus dies for Achilles. Hector will die for Patroclus. Achilles will die for Hector. The war consumes them all, one by one, until only ghosts and poets are left to count the cost.
So Patroclus fell, and a terrible fight arose over his body. The first to see him was Menelaus, son of Atreus, who strode through the front lines like a lioness guarding her firstborn calf, defensive and fierce. He covered the body with his shield, spear in hand, ready to kill any man who dared approach. But he was not unchallenged. Euphorbus, the Trojan who had first speared Patroclus in the back, saw his chance for glory. He approached Menelaus, his own spear glinting. "Son of Atreus," he shouted, "give way! I was the first to strike Patroclus. Let me take the spoils and win glory in Troy, or I will take your life as well." Menelaus's heart was black with anger. He remembered how Euphorbus had boasted, and his reply was cold iron. He told the boy of the price his own brother had paid for such arrogance, and warned him to retreat while he still could. Euphorbus, full of a fool's courage, refused. He lunged, striking Menelaus's shield, but the bronze did not break. Menelaus, praying to Father Zeus, drove his own spear through the base of the boy's throat. The point went clean through the tender neck. He fell like a young olive tree, one cultivated in a lonely place, ripped from the earth by a storm. His hair, braided with gold and silver, was soaked in his own blood. Menelaus moved to strip his armor, but he saw a greater threat approaching. He saw Hector. Hector came on, screaming his war cry. Menelaus knew he could not stand alone against him. His heart was torn. To retreat was cowardice, but to stand was death. He looked around for help, for great Ajax, but could not see him in the chaos. He chose to live. He backed away, turning again and again like a bearded lion driven from a cattle pen by dogs and men with spears. Hector wasted no time. He stripped the glorious armor of Achilles from Patroclus's shoulders. The bronze helm, the corslet, the greaves. But as he began to drag the naked corpse away, to sever the head and feed the body to the dogs of Troy, he was stopped. A wall of a man appeared. Ajax, son of Telamon, had arrived, his shield like a tower before him. Hector cursed, and fell back into the ranks of his men, holding the armor he had won. He had the prize, but the fight for the body was not over. It had just begun. The armor of Achilles. Hector, having retreated from Ajax, displayed the armor of Achilles to his Trojans. They roared their approval. He ran to a quiet spot behind the lines and stripped off his own armor, handing it to his men to carry back to the city. Then he began to put on the immortal arms of Achilles, the gift of the gods to his father, Peleus. He fitted the greaves to his legs, clasped with silver. He settled the corslet on his chest. He slung the silver-studded sword over his shoulder and took up the great shield. Finally, he lifted the helmet and placed it on his head. The horsehair plume nodded grimly. It was a perfect fit. Ares, the terrible god of war, entered him then. His limbs were filled with power and strength. He let out a mighty cry and returned to his allies. But now he appeared to them as Achilles himself, a blazing terror in the field. But not all saw this as a triumph. Far away, on the peak of Mount Ida, Zeus, the father of gods and men, watched. He looked down at Hector, radiant in the stolen arms, and his heart filled with pity. He shook his head slowly. "Ah, poor wretch," he thought. "You do not see your own death, which is so close now. You put on the immortal armor of a man far better than you, the man who other men tremble to face. You have killed his gentle friend and shamelessly stripped his body. For a little while, I will give you great power, but you will never return from this battle. Your wife, Andromache, will never receive this famous armor from your hands." Zeus sealed his promise with a nod. He made the armor fit Hector's body perfectly, as if it were his own skin. And Hector, feeling this new power, this divine endorsement, became a whirlwind of destruction. He raged among the Trojan allies, promising them rewards, promising them glory, urging them to help him keep the body of Patroclus from the Achaeans. The Trojans, spurred on by this vision of their hero clad in the armor of their nemesis, surged forward. The Achaeans, who had been holding their ground, began to fall back. The pressure was immense. The air grew thick with dust and blood, and the screams of the dying. The fight became a stalemate of pure attrition. A dark mist of war settled over the combatants, obscuring the sun. For hours, the best of the heroes fought and bled and died around the small patch of ground where Patroclus lay. The gods themselves looked on, their loyalties divided, as the war ground down to this single, brutal point of contact. The Achaeans were weakening, their resolve was failing, and all the while, Achilles knew nothing. He sat by his ships, unaware that the man he loved most in all the world was now just a naked corpse, fought over by dogs and men. The news had not yet reached him. The word reaches Achilles. The battle for the body turned against the Achaeans. Hector and Aeneas pressed them hard, and the line began to break. Menelaus, seeing the disaster unfolding, knew what he had to do. He found Antilochus, the swift-footed son of old Nestor, who was fighting on the flank. "Antilochus," he said, his voice heavy, "I have terrible news. You can see for yourself the gods are with Troy today. The best of the Achaeans has fallen. Patroclus is dead." He paused, letting the horror sink in. "Run, run to Achilles. Tell him his friend has fallen. Tell him we fight now only for his naked body, for Hector has the armor." Hearing this, Antilochus was struck dumb with sorrow. Tears filled his eyes. He could not speak, but he understood his duty. He gave his armor to his squire and turned and ran. He ran from the battle, his legs eating up the ground, his heart a stone in his chest, carrying the news that would break the world. Meanwhile, Achilles himself stood between his ships and the sea-wall, his heart full of dread. He had watched the Achaeans being driven back towards the camp, and a cold premonition gripped him. He spoke to his own soul, his voice tight with fear. "Why are they running?" he muttered. "I fear the gods are fulfilling the worst of my sorrows. My mother once told me that the best of the Myrmidons would die while I was still alive. Surely it cannot be him. Surely Patroclus is not dead." As he stood there, tormented by his thoughts, Antilochus arrived. He stopped before Achilles, weeping openly, the dust of his run caking his tear-streaked face. "Son of Peleus," he choked out, "I bring news you will not want to hear. Patroclus has fallen. They are fighting over his naked body. Hector has your armor." A black cloud of grief descended upon Achilles. In his despair, he scooped up handfuls of soot and dust from the ground and poured them over his head, fouling his handsome face. He threw himself down in the dirt, a great man brought low, and tore at his own hair. He lay there, huge and broken, in the dust. The serving women whom he and Patroclus had captured came running from the tents. They saw their master and cried out in sorrow, beating their breasts and collapsing around him. Antilochus knelt beside him, holding his hands, weeping, afraid that in his grief Achilles might take a knife and cut his own throat. Then Achilles let out a terrible, piercing cry, a sound of such pure agony that it crossed the fields and the water. It traveled down, down into the depths of the sea, to where his mother, the goddess Thetis, sat with her sister nymphs. She heard her son's cry, and she knew. She answered his cry with her own wail of sorrow, and the nymphs of the sea gathered around her, their own hearts filled with dread. The time for grief was here. But the time for vengeance was coming.
Achilles will rise from the dirt. He will refuse to eat or sleep. His only purpose now is the death of Hector. The war has taken the one thing he loved, and in return he will unleash a fury that will shake both heaven and earth. Hector wears the armor of a dead man walking. He has won the greatest prize of his life, and in doing so has guaranteed his own death. The cost of this war is absolute. There is no victory, only a chain of revenge that pulls every hero into the grave. The archive holds another voice. A man, born a slave, who became a king among the Crow. His words a testament to a life lived beyond any border. Click here to hear his